Yeah, good morning, everybody. Macroeconomics. We are in the theoretical part. We started with the so-called Keynesian cross. And graphically, this has looked like this. Demand on the vertical axis and total income on the horizontal axis. And we had made the assumptions that the economy is following the demand side, so every consumption and investment plan will be fulfilled, and we just produce that amount in our economy, which we are planning in quantity due to our demand plans. So we will find no prices within this model, and graphically the equilibrium was given by all possible points where demand meets total income, and then we had, due to the Keynesian consumption hypothesis, a total demand curve which is a little bit flatter than this 45-degree line, which represents all possible equilibria. And then the cut of both was the overall equilibrium, but we have some shortfalls. Still, we have no prices, and especially we have also no money market. And then we went to the ISLM model, where we introduced the money market, and we also introduced the new variable, the interest rate, and then we derived from the commodity market, where now we made investment depending on interest rate, the so-called IS curve, because this equilibrium condition translates also one-to-one into investment equals savings. And this IS curve was falling with income. And from the money market, commodity market, and from the money market, where we had money demand is depending on income and on interest rates, the so-called LM curve, which was increasing in income, and then the cut of these two was the overall equilibrium in our model. Well, and then also within these models we made the analysis about fiscal policy, and here we not only in the ISLM model could not only analyze fiscal policy, but now also monetary policy, money market. But now, of course, in order to be realistic, we have to relax our assumption of fixed prices, and this we will do now in the so-called ASAD model. So what we will do is that we heuristically will derive an aggregate supply function depending on prices, on price level in our economy, and from the ISLM model remember we had already introduced the variable of price level when we have talked about nominal and real money, where we defined real money by capital M, nominal money divided by the price level, which we have here. And yeah, so now we will relax this very extreme assumption that prices cannot adjust. But we will not fully flexibilize in this part our price level. We still assume, and we have already talked about this, that especially in the labor market, and labor, of course, the most important production factor within our economy, that in general in the labor market we find some price rigidities. But until now, we just have said, well, wages, prices cannot adjust, and now in a part they can adjust a little bit. This we will do now. But we will start at first with a qualitative derivation of the aggregate supply curve. And there we have three different explanations for the derivation of our AS curve, the so-called Keynesian theory of rigid wages. So wages can adjust, but not very fast, or in general, because of price rigidities. And what is always very important in economics and of course in macroeconomics is how do we model expectations? Because what we find in general, we say, well, the Homo economicus concept means that we are a rational, egoistic utility maximizer, and then we can look to ourselves. This would mean if something is a little bit cheaper than another product, then total demand would switch to this other product. But if we ask ourselves, do we really do this? Then we quite often find, well, due to a rule of thumb, maybe in most cases, but not always. And also, if we say that we are always act rationally, then we would always take all information we can get to form our expectations. And then we also can ask ourselves, do we really do this? Or if we are asked what will be the weather like tomorrow, do we not do something it in a very easy way that we just say, well, one assumption would be the weather tomorrow is the weather today. A very easy modeling, a very easy way of modeling expectations, where we do not fit in all informations we can get from some complex weather models or something like this. And yeah, and then if we, so to speak, form our expectations quite easy, then we can also derive this AS curve. So let's go through these three explanations. The first one, rigid wages. Well, of course, as always, what are the production side is doing, what are the enterprises are doing is just profit maximization. Profit and profits are prices times quantity minus costs. Well, and within these costs, one main cost factor is labor. And we are paying for labor our wages. And now if we assume that major wages in the short run will be more or less be constant and prices are increasing in general in our economy, then the costs are constant and the revenue is increasing, so slightly also our profits will rise if output prices are increasing. And from this analysis, then we can say if in this case taking costs as given and increasing prices, then profits are increasing. What will then the enterprise do? The enterprises will increase production. So costs are fixed, prices are increasing, and then we increase X, we increase production. So what we then obtain in general is a qualitative dependence of production quantity X depending on P and with a positive dependence. If prices in general are increased, we have an incentive also to increase production. But please keep in mind, this is a very general derivation of this dependence of quantity on prices, which is not a microeconomic analysis, as you have done this in microeconomics. It depends just on this assumption that in general we find inflexible labor markets. So it is a macroeconomic derivation due to this assumption. Or if we do not only assume that we have these rigidities in the labor market, but in general we find, especially also looking at investment goods, larger goods, that we do not also there find very fast price jumps. So now we assuming we have rigidities in the labor market and also in prices of other goods. Then we can think of now that we would see a decreasing price level in general. And now it is important that we distinguish between price level and what was price level. This was measured via CPI, Consumer Price Index, and this was a weighted average of many goods. So around 1,000, 2,000 goods are feeding into this price level. And just, I think yesterday it was announced the new consumer price index for the Eurozone, and that inflation has increased. So prices has started, or the inflation rate has increased. This was what we found in the media, I think now at 2.6%. So we know that the price level in general has increased. But if we look then at a single enterprise, then we do not directly know, well, in general, the price level has increased. What has done my price of my good, what I am producing? Because it could be that, let's say I'm a manufacturer in the automobile sector. Inflation has increased, then maybe the increase of inflation rate is due to energy prices, to food prices, and something like this. So I do not directly know what my own price in my sector has done due to this assumed possible rigidities of other goods. So, therefore, if I assume that my price level is rigid, in general, the price level has decreased, then I would not adjust my production because I think, well, some other prices has fallen. My price is in my sector is still the same price as yesterday. So I can assume that at least some enterprises will not reduce their production, although the general price level has decreased. But then, due to the general decrease of the price level, in the following, these enterprises will see that their revenues will go down since their sales will fall. And if now their revenues are falling, then they will of course also start to reduce their production, and then we also obtain a lower aggregated supply triggered by this decreased price level. So also then we obtain from this general assumption of rigid prices also a positive dependence between quantity and prices. So prices are increasing, I increase my production, prices are falling, then I reduce my production. And the last one, due to my opinion, maybe the most important, because almost everything is about expectations in economics, that we in general cannot, as I have also already said, distinguish between a general price level and what are my prices doing relatively to this general price level. Again, let's assume that we have a falling general price level. Then I could assume that my own price has fallen relative to other output prices. And this is triggered since I cannot really distinguish between the general price level and my own. So again, due to this mistakenly made assumption, I also will reduce my production because of the general fall in price level. And what can also happen is if we go then to the labor market and also workers make this mistake, that if the price level has fallen, that they nominal wages have decreased, then they also will reduce their work. And if in the production process I reduce my working time, then this implies, of course, also a reduction in the production. So the effect is then, so to speak, due to mistakenly made expectations that in general the enterprises will reduce production and also individually the employees will reduce their working time. And again, in general, I get these positive dependence of supply on prices. I will also put here the superscript S for supply. Oops. Well, and though we in general have then derived from macroeconomic explanations what we almost always see if we are looking at markets, that we find an increasing supply function in prices. Okay, and please be careful because in some short videos then it's just said, well, it looks like the same as your general market diagram with an increased supply function. But in general, if you look at your business administration courses, then this dependence here is derived from a microeconomic view. So the derivation of this curve is quite different compared what we have done via these three different theories. Well, if we have a supply function, then of course we need also a demand function. And this demand function we derive from our ISLM model. Well, this is not very surprisingly because this model is a demand-driven model. We are describing the economy from the demand side. And then we look at this part here. There we already have introduced the price level when we have talked about money supply and then real money supply. And until now, we said this is just a fixed number. And now we assume, or we want to analyze what happens in our ISLM model if this price level can adjust. Well, qualitatively, we can say if real prices are rising, so P is going up, then of course capital M over P is decreasing. So real money is decreasing. And then remember, we had already discussed monetary policy within the ISLM model. There we said what happens if the central bank starts to print money. This was just an increase of capital M. And this has shifted the LM curve downwards to the left, to the right. So then, of course, we can argue in the opposite way. If the central bank would decrease capital M, then we would obtain an upward shift to the upper left of the LM curve. But from a mathematical point of view, it doesn't matter what reason changes real money, small m. If this small m decreases, if capital M is constant and P is increasing, then small m is decreasing. And then, of course, this also means that the LM curve has to move to the upper left. And then remember the ISLM model, LM curve, IS curve. If this curve is now moving up due to an increase of price level, then the cut of these two curves, the new LM curve, means that total output is decreasing. So price level is going up and Y is decreasing. So qualitatively, we obtain a dependence between total demand and price level, and now with the opposite sign, that an increase of prices means a decrease of demand. So this was maybe quite fast. Let's do this also graphically. Again, we are starting from an equilibrium point. So this LM curve is depending on some starting price level P0. Then we obtain total demand depending on this price level. And now we put a diagram, price quantity beneath our interest rate income diagram. And then we assume the starting price level would be somewhere. P0 to be here. And then this income level is depending on this price level. And now what happens if our price level increase? This means M1 equals M over P1 is lower than M over P0. Again, shift to the upper left of LM. So this would be then LM1, depending on P1. P1 larger than P0, somewhere here, and the corresponding income level Y star of P1 is lower than the former one. So here we have one point in the price income diagram, and this would be then a second point in the price income diagram. And then, as we have made it in the derivation of the LM curve and the IS curve, we make the thought experiment that we say this analysis we have to do for every possible price level. So then we would obtain all these other possible price income pairs. And overall, we obtain this decreasing aggregate demand curve in prices. Well, then, surprise, surprise, we put these two curves together in our price income diagram, and the cut of supply and demand is now our overall equilibrium of the economy. And please be really careful. That you really know that this derivation of the IS curve and the AD curve comes from a macroeconomic point of view and not from what you have done in microeconomics, that you said demand is coming from utility maximization and supply is coming from profit maximization. Well, but still we have assumed, especially in the derivation of our IS curve within here, we still have assumed some rigidities in price level. Still, we have rigidities in prices and wages. They are not fully fixed now, but they cannot directly adjust. And then we can discuss what happens if we assume that prices can directly adjust. And I think, as you have made it when you have discussed cost functions, in general, you have a split between fixed costs and variable costs in business administration. And then I think you also have argued, if you go to the long run, then of course also your fixed cost will be flexible. And the argumentation behind this is you have some production line or something like this, or some huge machines. In the short run, you can only produce your own goods with these machines. So this is a fixed cost factor. You have bought these machines. But in the long run, of course, you can sell these machines. Then you get money and you can do something new with this. And now we also go to the long run analysis. And there we say, well, okay, we have price rigidities, but in the long run, wages and all prices in our economy can adjust so that we come to an equilibrium. And what does this mean? Now we are switching the view from our demand-driven economy. Now in the long run, we say prices are fully flexible. And then our production level is only depending on the general conditions in our society. So how good is our infrastructure? How good is our education system? What kind of resources do we have? So this general factors, this framework of our economy determines what can we produce. And also, this is your task in the next years, how innovative is our society? Let's put this here. Innovation. Oops, this is called natural output. So, and then we can ask ourselves, given all these conditions, what is the possible production in our economy? And since this depends on these long-term conditions, we cannot change, unfortunately, our education system from one day to the other. This would take many years. We see it in our infrastructure. If we look at the situation in the railway sector or at our streets, our highways, our bridges in Germany, we cannot fix these conditions within months, within 1 or 2 years. This will take a longer time. So therefore, we can say these conditions are more or less stable over a long time, 5, 10 years or something like this. And then we call this level of possible production natural output. And this, of course, this general level of possible output, depending on this general condition, does not depend anymore on prices. It's just the possible production given the general conditions in our society. If we do not have more resources, then we cannot produce more. If we have a general education level in our economy, then we can only produce what our workers can produce due to their abilities. So this depends then not anymore on prices, and therefore within our price income diagram, this long run supply curve is just a vertical line fixed as at the level of natural output. And therefore, if we are in a long run equilibrium in our economy, all these three lines, the medium term, some price level adjustment is possible, aggregate supply curve, the aggregate demand curve, and the long run supply curve have to cut in the same point. So this is then the long run equilibrium in the economy. Well, and now we are done with our general model. And again, we will ask ourselves what happens now in this model if we are doing fiscal policy and monetary policy. First, at the short medium term, and then assuming this vertical aggregate supply curve in the long run perspective. So let's start, therefore, in an overall equilibrium condition. And now, fiscal policy. This means plus delta G, increase of government expenditure. And in the upper one, I show you the diagram in the ISLM model. What has happened if we have increased government expenditure? Which curve will at first adjust? You can just have a look in the slides of last week. There we have discussed this. In which curve do we directly find government expenditure? What says the internet? Well, this was in the commodity market in the IS curve. Here we had the equilibrium condition. Y equals YD is C plus I plus G. Here we find government expenditure as a direct variable. And if this has increased, then we obtained an outward shift of the IS curve. So if delta G first, then at a first impulse, upper right shift of IS. And this, of course, means an increase of income. We had this new equilibrium point in the ISLM model. Income is increasing. Due to our higher demand. But now we said there is more demand in the economy. And if we look only at the ISLM model, then we said, well, the enterprises start to produce due to this higher demand. But now we can also adjust prices. So the enterprises can now choose between, due to higher demand, should I produce more bicycles or should I just increase the price of bicycles? Now we are at first, of course, in the situation of the medium term. There we assume that we cannot choose only to increase prices. So we will move along the medium-term IS curve to slightly increase production, but also to increase prices. Let's say 50-50 of this overall increase of total demand. 50% of this increase of total demand we absorb via price level increase and 50% via an increase of production. So then, following the medium term AS curve, prices will adjust a little bit. But what happens if price levels is increasing? This means real amount of money is decreasing. This we just have discussed 10 minutes ago. This decreases real money, M over P. P is going up. Nominal money amount is fixed by the central bank. So real money is decreasing. But what happens if real money is decreasing in the ISLM model? The LM curve is shifting to the upper left. This was just this diagram here. So this is then the point where we have this feedback that we now have flexible prices. So this implies an upper left shift of LM. To IS prime of LM to LM prime. So the overall medium-term effect is then not this full right shift of income, but only this one. So increased prices to P prime. And then, of course, due to the derivation, the graphical derivation of our AD curve, increased prices means also that we have an outward shift of our AD curve due to this higher price level. So, and this implies a upper right shift of AD to AD prime. So, and if we now go to the long run situation, but in the long run, the general conditions have not changed, and therefore still only yn production is possible, and this means prices are increasing even more, and AS is shifting upward to AS prime. So then we are at this new AS curve, and in the end, total supply is decreasing, and we end up at our general possible production level. In the end, only prices has risen. We have just only the situation we started with government expenditure, and in the long run we end up only with inflation and nothing else have changed. And we had discussed that in general high level inflation is bad for the economy. So this is then, especially here from 8 to 10, this is then a supply side view on the economy. And now you can take these different views to the situation in Germany, where now the different parties are discussing what to do. And there we have some parties which say, well, the thing what we have to do is to change the general conditions in our society. Just only pushing with new debt the demand doesn't help, because we get only a higher price level, only inflation. And the other ones, they more or less argue, well, in general you are right, but if we take this increase of government expenditure in order really to change these general conditions for a better infrastructure, for a better education system. And since the prices are not directly adjusted, over time it could have a good effect. But both views are derived very logical. And this is then, yeah, your decision in February. What is your opinion? Where you make your cross at the polls. Okay, and then we will also discuss monetary policy. This is almost the same discussion. We start now with an increase of nominal. Please keep this in mind. Now we are changing real money because we are changing capital M, not P. The price level change will then be an effect of the increase of nominal money amount. So, in which curve in the ISLM model, in the upper diagram, where do we find the variable money, nominal money? This was, of course, in the money market, and the LM curve is representing the money market. Here we have M over P equals L D over Y and I. So if we increase money, then of course we get a right downward shift of the LM curve. Yes, you have written it. Thank you very much. And you have also written IS curve. Sorry, I haven't seen the chat. Right downward shift of LM to LM prime. Well, of course, here we obtain a new cut of LM prime and IS. There we do not change anything. So we obtain an increase of income. So higher demand in our economy. And now everything is the same as in the analysis of fiscal policy. So now compare fiscal policy, because we have an increase of income. Y is going up. Again, we can partly adjust prices and partly adjust production. So again, moving along medium AS curve, means increasing prices to P prime, but this has then the opposite effect of the increase of nominal money amount. A part of this increase of nominal money amount is now absorbed by an increase of price level. So this decreases real money, M over P, since P has increased. So the LM curve is again shifting back. This implies a backward shift of LM prime to LM double prime. Not fully, but partly. So at first, we are going outward and now back, and we obtain this new and we obtain a new medium term equilibrium at y double prime and p double prime. But again, increased prices also shift outward AD. And since I called these always double prime, I always directly call the shifted AD curve now not AD prime, but AD double prime, so that in this new medium term equilibrium, we have always the same superscript. Outward shifts outward AD to AD double prime. Well, and then long run, general conditions have not changed. So we end up again at yn and an outward shift of as. This I now always also call as double prime and oh, now I need another superscript. This would be then p triple prime and increased prices to p triple prime. So no increase of production, but only inflation. So again, this is the supply side view on the economy. Well, and this is then, the more complex argumentation how just printing money feeds through the economy. Compare this with the quantity theory of money. There we said mv equals py, and if the velocity of money is not adjusting very fast, also y, in general GDP growth, is not that fast as the price adjustment if we assume fully flexible prices. And then in the quantity theory of money, we more or less directly said, well, increasing money amount, nominal money amount means an increase of price level, so we end up only in inflation. This was one sentence, and now in a more complex analysis, we see how this printing money feeds through the whole economy, but of course the result is then the same. So compare this with MV equals PY, the quantity theory of money, where we just said M is increasing, P is increasing. So then let's summarize this. So what we can say is, still in the medium term, also in the ASAD model, we have also a positive effect on income. So here, oops, where we are. Other way around. Oops. Still in the medium term, we had here the positive effect on income. Income is slightly increasing, but some part of this fiscal impulse or the money impulse is absorbed by the price adjustment. And in the long run, of course, we have to admit that we end up only with price increases. Well, if you look at the derivation here with our 9 to 10 steps here, then we could think of that all this happens in a row, but still if you look at here in our model, we have no dynamic model. There is never a variable for time. So this is still a static model, and this you will have also to keep in mind. These steps which I have written down, they do not follow in time in a row, but they follow within this analysis just instantaneously. And in reality, of course, not everything happens at the same time. There we have then, of course, a time delay, and therefore, and this is now the political economic policy argumentation which we have in Germany. If we would say everything happens simultaneously, then an increase of government expenditure or a money increase would have only the effect of inflation. But since we have, of course, in reality, this time delay, so to speak, we can argue now taking money and also financing this via debt, and you have to repay it in the future. And therefore, you should be very careful that if we increase public debt, public expenditure via debt, that you really see, okay, this increase of expenditure is used for something which you need in the future. So for a better infrastructure, for better education, for digitalization and something like this, and not only for repaying some social funding or something like this. Because this money, of course, then will be gone, and this in general would only increase the price level. Well, just have a look which parties promise what you want for the future. Okay, then I would say we stop here, and in the last lectures then we will in general deal with a so-called neoclassical model. Well, we have already in a very simple way discussed the neoclassical model. The neoclassical model is just assuming this vertical long run aggregate supply curve, and that this curve determines what we can do in our society. And now we more or less want to discuss from a theoretical point of view from where is this vertical line in general coming from. And for this, maybe for Thursday, please have a look in your microeconomic course where you had the utility maximization. This was u of x1, x2 max subject 2 m equals p1 x1 plus p2 x2, and profit maximization where just p equals p. Y was depending on capital and labor. This we have also discussed when we, in the beginning of the lecture, have talked about GDP. Which part of the income is due to capital income, which part is due to labor income. There, you should know in Germany it's roughly 1/3 to 2/3 minus costs, and costs is the labor costs, wages times a labor amount minus capital costs, interest rates times capital. And from this, we obtain labor and capital demand, and from this we obtain labor and capital supply. And I will show you that just interchanging the letters, it is 100% the same as you have done it in microeconomics. And therefore, just have a short look at the thing when you have done the household optimum and the profit optimum of enterprises and households. Okay, then of course, sorry, the last one for next week, I have forgotten in the beginning. Next week on Tuesday, we have the talk from Dirk Gerlach from the Bundesbank. So no lecture at 8 o'clock, and please, you are welcome to join the talk. It will be, of course, in English. And the other one was, if you want to evaluate, then you need a code, and therefore please come into the lecture and then you can evaluate this lecture. So, thank you very much for today.